So my name is Anna Willemse. I'm Senior Project Manager for EUnetHTA, so the European Network for Health Technology Assessment, and I work at the Dutch National Healthcare Institute here in Diemen, so actually quite close by today. So we will run you through a little bit of what HTA is, also linked to the regulation and the collaboration with EMA, and then my colleague Stephanie will run you through more the procedures of patients and clinical expert involvement. I'm putting on this slide and I'm not talking you through it, but if you would want to take a picture of it, I would recommend it because we do use a lot of abbreviations. We will try to speak them out in full, but sometimes we forget or they are in the abbreviation on the slide. So it could be helpful to have this close by. And I think in the supporting document shared with you, we also turned it somewhat into a glossary so that you can see how we operationalize these concepts as well. Giving a few more seconds because I saw some pictures. Okay. So very briefly, an introduction to HTA, EUnetHTA 21, and the key products of HTA. And we have a lot of information to share here, and I'm aware of the time, so we will be selecting some of the key topics here, but please do feel free to ask questions also in the Q&A session. So Michael already explained it in a nutshell, the difference between regulatory and HTA, and I'm focusing, of course, on pharmaceuticals here at the moment. So for the regulators, and specifically then EMA in this case, they have the authorization focus. So they look at the efficacy, safety, and the quality of the drug. And on this slide, you can also see some of the key questions they have with that. So they look at, does technology X work? Does the benefit of technology X outweigh the risks? Is it of sufficient quality? But also, is there perhaps any additional needs for technology X post-licensing? If we now turn to HTA, it is the assessment focus, as is in the name, but it really is about the benefit in comparison to the current standard treatment. So as Michael said, it is about putting the data into context. So at HTA, we look at how does technology X compare to technology Y? Is it better than what we already have? In what patient population could it be better? Does it maybe have fewer harms? Is there anything else that needs to be considered? So there's a lot of additional questions that pop up there. And what is important is also the last bullet point, because when we do the assessment, it still also needs to be put into a national context. So there can be other aspects that still need to be considered nationally after an assessment is done. So this is what we would call appraisal. So there are two different items there. And basically the underlying question is, do we want to pay for it? And that is then what comes into the decision making. Some countries would do a cost effectiveness analysis for that, but not every country has that into their health technology assessment systems. So what is the situation if we compare it to currently and to under the regulation? And Valentina nicely explained the purpose of the regulation. So if we look at the regulatory side, we see it's very centralized. We have the EMA, there is one legislation in place, so there are very well-defined criteria and assessment, so agreed assessment criteria. For the HTA side, it's very different, because every country can have one or even more HTA processes in place, especially in countries where the decision-making is more regionalized. So that is why we think it's so important the regulation comes into place, because it also will make the clinical assessment and the joint scientific consultations more central and more commonly done. And there will be one methodology and approach for both of those items. As I said before, they still need to be put into a national context. So there still will be a follow-up after an HTA is done on the European level. So you've heard the term EUnetHTA 21 before. So who are we? Because we are indeed with a number of colleagues here today. So EUnetHTA 21 is a service contract with the Commission, and we aim to support the implementation of the HTA regulation after it had been adopted. We are a consortium of 13 different European HTA organizations from 12 different member states. And importantly, I want to stress that all our output is joint output. So we're all around the table when we draft our deliverables. We need to review multiple times, and we also get to vote a couple of different times. Our focus is mainly on developing methodological and transversal guidelines. Transversal then would be, for example, the guideline on how we involve patients and clinical experts, but also how we deal with conflict of interest. And I do want to note, and I'm pretty sure questions will pop up, we do have a different policy at the moment than EMA has. So that is something we also could discuss for the future, what would be the best approach there. But within EUnetHTA 21, it is what we have to deal with at the moment. We also do produce a couple of scientific consultations, precisely 8, and joint clinical assessments, although at the moment they are only for medical devices. So the key products, you've heard the terms before, the joint scientific consultations and the joint clinical assessments. The scientific consultation is scientific advice provided jointly by HTA bodies to a manufacturer, and they can be done in parallel with the regulators. In EUnetHTA 21, they are all done in parallel with the EMA. And the aim is to generate the evidence that satisfies the needs of also the HTA, so that we can really have the best evidence available to do our assessment. The joint clinical assessment is a HTA report produced by multiple European member states as well, focusing purely on the clinical domains. And that also then aims to avoid duplication of work, but also increase the consistency of these assessments. Very briefly, where these products would come in, and we're showing the life cycle approach, but I'm aware this can be quite of a complex slide to look at. So we start with the drug development, which then runs from the research all the way to that the drug is being prescribed. EMA is then on the top right, and the HTA is on the bottom, a little bit more to the left. What you can see here is that the joint clinical assessment takes place in parallel to the regulatory assessment, so at time of the CHMP opinion. So for this, it's really important to keep in mind the different remits that we have. We do ask different questions, so we may do it at the same time, but we do have a different question in mind. The joint scientific consultations, and actually I should have started with that because they're also the first in the life cycle approach, they take place at the research phase, so they need to be conducted before even a pivotal trial, for example, is being developed. Michael alluded already about the work plan we have with the EMA, and I just wanted to point out a few activities we have on there. And one of those is the collaboration on the methodologies for patient and clinical expert engagement. So we try to sum up a few of the activities we have done so far and what we want to continue to do. And we always very much appreciate the collaboration we have with our EMA colleagues, because we definitely can learn a lot also from the coordination they do with the stakeholder groups. So the EMA colleagues, for example, reviewed our guideline also on the involvement of patients and clinical experts. So that was very helpful. And we have continuous discussions with our EMA colleagues, for example, on their experience on the stakeholder management, the process for identifying experts, how to deal with conflicts of interest and remuneration, but also how to set up a database and how to maintain a database. So that is also translated into some of our recommendations. What we also try to do is exchange with the EMA if we start a joint clinical assessment, so that we can tap into the same pool of expertise of the clinical experts and patients, so that it's easier to have a way in. And that really helped us for the joint clinical assessments. And as you can see today, we also try to participate in either training sessions or roundtables or discussion platforms. And with that, I would like to hand over to Stephanie.
Yes, thank you, Anne. And and sorry, so sorry. Yes, so also from my side, thank you very much for having us today in your meeting. It's really a pleasure being here and introduce EUnetHTA 21 and the HTA perspective in general. I will move on with our slides from here and will first of all also drop some words on myself. So I am scientific advisor and head of the Secretariat for the Joint Scientific Consultations at the GBA in Germany. And we as a GBA are responsible for all the activities referring to the Joint Scientific Consultations throughout the actual EUnetHTA project phase, which is the EUnetHTA 21. So I would now just share with you a very concrete example of our preparatory work that EUnetHTA 21 is doing for preparing for the implementation of the HTA regulation. And the very concrete example would be the EUnetHTA 21 process for engaging patients and HCPs in our joint production. For this slide that you can see now, it's very obvious to all of us what is the value actually of including clinical experts and patients in our processes. You can see from the table that the aspects to look at look quite similar for both these groups, patients and HCPs. So we have aspects of the disease condition and available therapies that are interested to receive feedback from both these groups. And you will also see that just the angle is slightly different in terms of those two stakeholder groups. So for patients, we would ask what is expected from new treatment options, what are the limitations to current treatments, and for the clinical experts, for example, we would look at long-term effects of the disease and ask for the most common actual standard of care within the EU. The next aspect that we wanted to highlight is information on outcomes. Here for the patients, we would ask about signs and symptoms that have the greatest impact actually on the functionality and physiological aspects of life for the patients, while for the HCPs, we would rather help defining relevant safety, efficacy, and patient-centered outcomes. And on top of that, for patients, we would also look at other relevant aspects, so such as the ethical and or societal issues. For the information on intervention for HCPs, it would more be contextual factors what we will focus on, and we'll look at issues that affect safety or efficacy of the intervention and position of intervention in the current treatment landscape. So overall, of course, this expert input is very helpful to contextualize the data for both our joint products, the JSC and the JCA. So who can actually get involved at the moment in our EUnetHTA 21 project and our joint products? And this is also based on the requirements that will be later listed also in the HTA regulation. So first of all, we will look at the external experts. So this is the engagement on an individual level. Here it's patients affected by the diseases or clinical experts that can be involved in our procedures. On this individual level, of course, experts are speaking on their own behalf and not on behalf of an organization, and they are able to describe the situation beyond the borders of their own member states. So actual the European experience is also very important for us if we search for such experts to involve. As my colleague Anne already mentioned, also a very relevant point here is the declaration of interest that is needed to be engaged, as well as the confidentiality agreement. Both of that will be reviewed by our internal committee for conflict of interest, the COIC, and there it is a decision on a case-by-case basis to finally involve these selected experts. More information, of course, can be found online on also our website of EUnetHTA 21 and our policy there. On the other hand, also experts can be involved as stakeholders. Here it would be rather the organizational level, so patient organizations or healthcare professional organizations to be involved. And here, of course, they would represent the general interest of their group in terms of the relation to EUnetHTA 21 and the HTA regulation in general. Here, if you are engaged as stakeholders, it's not necessary to share with us a declaration of interest. However, also here we ask the stakeholders to provide information on their organization's funding. And we will next look at the different processes of our joint production. Where can actually patients and clinical experts be involved in our processes? And first of all, I would focus on the joint scientific consultation process. Here you see in the two arrows the both parts of the actual consultation process. So first of all, it would be receiving the underlying documents, the briefing book, etc. But more the input of the experts would be after that. So when we would really go into the phase of putting together our JSC written recommendations. We would have either an interview or written statement, ideally before the list of issues is done in terms of the development process. And at the latest, we would need input before the face-to-face meeting with the health technology developer. There would be the option to review this list of issues as mentioned, and also the experts could participate in the face-to-face meeting and engage with everyone together in that meeting to discuss actually the development plan. And they will also receive later on the final written recommendations, which is the final output of our process. Secondly, I will look at the process of the joint clinical assessments. Here we have the scoping phase and the actual assessment phase. Here the experts have the chance to be involved when defining the PICO. They could be involved via questionnaire, interviews could happen and could be conducted. And they could also even be engaged in the actual PICO consolidation meeting. During the assessment phase, they would answer questions that the coordinating agencies, so the assessor and co-assessor, might have. And just to mention that the national procedures to involve experts are not within the remit of the HTA regulation, so they're also not in our guidance, but we have some references there and highlight where we would see actually these national procedures also to come in and fulfill the whole purpose of engage on different levels. The actual guidance that EUnetHTA 21 conducted is finalized and just has been endorsed by our highest committee beginning of November. And we're at the moment just waiting to be able to have that document also on our website published. That will be very shortly available. Just very shortly looking at the relevant documents, and I mentioned them already, at least some of them. So we have some underlying documentation that is shared with the experts. That's the briefing package, especially for the joint scientific consultations that can be shared. And for receiving the actual inputs from the experts, we have two different input templates designed. Also by EUnetHTA 21 when we put together also our guidance. I won't go into details here, but of course we can take detailed question on that one later. And just for you to know, so for these final output of the joint procedures, and that are the final written recommendations and the assessment report for JCA, it is the case that the full expert input is actually included there and can be seen as an annex in this final deliverable. And I won't go into the details for the actual input templates. So they have a certain structure. We shared with you those documents as supporting documents. You saw them probably, and we're more than happy to answer any questions that you have on those ones. And I would just conclude with our take-home messages for our talk. So we saw that regulatory and HTA have different remits and purposes, but we really want to emphasize that we both aim actually for data generation by the health technology developer that is fit for purpose for our both remits to finally make innovative medicines available to patients. That is the aim of both of our remits. And EMA and EUnetHTA 21 collaborate intensively. You saw that from different items of the work plan. And also here we share experiences on aspects related to stakeholder and expert involvement and their activities through the processes. Might slightly differ, but we are getting closer and closer and are always in close exchange and discussions. And the third one, but not the least take-home message, is that, of course, contribution of patients and HCPs is of very high value to help especially contextualize on the needs and experiences for those either affected by a particular disease or dealing with it. And here we highly encourage all of you and welcome any expert participation in both our joint productions, so the joint scientific consultations and the joint clinical assessments. And with that, we would close and be very open for any questions. Thank you.